In the early winter of 1942, during the height of the German advance toward the Eastern Front, the Wehrmacht experienced one of the coldest and least documented phases of the war. Temperatures in several sectors of Belarus and western Russia dropped far below what the German command had anticipated, often reaching levels below -30 degrees Celsius. German units operating in the dense forests near Vitebsk, Smolensk, and the Pripyat regions were especially vulnerable, as these areas combined extreme cold with thick undergrowth, minimal visibility, and almost no fixed landmarks. During this period, German infantry divisions routinely dispatched small reconnaissance patrols into the forests to monitor Soviet troop movements and partisan activity. These patrols normally consisted of between 5 and 12 men, lightly equipped, ordered to gather intelligence and return before nightfall. But as winter intensified, many of these patrols began failing to return. German battalion logs recorded an unusual rise in non-returning reconnaissance units, a term used at the time to categorize patrols that vanished without confirmed contact with the enemy. One of the most documented cases emerged from the area east of Vitebsk, where the Ninth Army reported that a 12-man patrol sent out shortly before midday never made contact again. Radio logs show that the patrol made a brief transmission early in the afternoon, reporting worsening visibility due to heavy snowfall and advising they were delaying their return. After that, all communication stopped. No distress signal was issued. No gunfire was heard. When a search party was sent the following morning, no bodies, equipment, or signs of a firefight were found. Their footprints were visible for some distance before they simply disappeared under layers of overnight snowfall. This type of disappearance occurred frequently enough that the German command initially believed the units had been captured by Soviet regular forces. However, interrogation reports of Soviet prisoners later revealed that the Red Army had not been operating in that forest corridor at all during that week. Instead, the area was known primarily for partisan groups who practiced silent tracking and targeted small, isolated patrols, rather than direct engagement with larger formations. Throughout December and January, German field reports frequently mentioned vanishing tracks, patrols swallowed by the snow, and lack of evidence of combat. In one instance, a unit returned and reported that shifting snowstorms made it impossible to distinguish their own outbound tracks, causing them to move in circles for hours before locating a defensive line by accident. Other patrols, however, were not as fortunate. Soviet archives later released in the 1990s confirmed that several partisan detachments in this region specialized in shadowing German patrols silently, until the soldiers became disoriented by darkness or snow. These detachments focused on capturing weapons, documents, and radios, while minimizing noise that could alert nearby German units. The German soldiers who disappeared were often taken deep into partisan-controlled territory, where recovery was nearly impossible. Yet even with this explanation, several vanishings remain unexplained. In January of 1943, the German 206th Infantry Division reported 3 separate patrols disappearing within a 5-day span. Searches recovered no spent cartridges, no blood, and no equipment left behind, unusual even for partisan engagements, which typically left at least some trace. The disappearances generated enough concern that the divisional command temporarily halted all small unit patrols in that sector, and insisted on larger, 20-man reconnaissance groups for several weeks. The pattern of these unexplained losses created both confusion and fear within the German ranks. Soldiers began referring to certain routes as dead paths, warning newcomers not to travel alone between tree lines where visibility was naturally low. Even higher command began acknowledging that something abnormal was occurring, as the scale and consistency of the disappearances did not match previously known partisan tactics. This was the beginning of what German field officers later called the vanished patrol phenomenon. By the middle of January 1943, The pattern of missing reconnaissance units had become a serious operational concern for the German Ninth Army. Orders were issued requiring every patrol to carry extra flares, doubled ammunition, and an additional radio battery. Yet these precautions did little to address the underlying problem. The soldiers were not dying in firefights. They were disappearing without a trace. One of the most studied cases involved an 8-man patrol from the 337th Infantry Regiment, operating near the forests west of WW2. This patrol was considered experienced. Most of its members had served since the early days of Operation Barbarossa. The squad leader, Oberjefreiter Ernst Halder, had led more than 30 reconnaissance missions in the previous months. His reliability and discipline were frequently mentioned in battalion reports. On the morning of their disappearance, the temperature was estimated at below -25°C. A thick fog rolled over the forest, lowering visibility to less than 30 meters. The patrol left their forward position shortly after first light, tasked with confirming reported Soviet movements along a narrow forest road that had been used by partisan groups. The patrol made 2 routine radio check-ins before noon, both confirming no enemy contact and slow progress due to deep snow. The final transmission came at approximately 1 hour before sunset. Halder reported that they had detected traces of movement near a frozen ravine and were proceeding cautiously. His voice, according to the operator who received the message, sounded normal and calm. There were no signs of distress or urgency. After that message, no further communication was ever received. When the patrol failed to return by midnight, their battalion organized a search group of 20 men supported by a machine gun team. The search began before dawn, and within 3 hours they located the patrol's outbound footprints. The trail appeared normal at first, straight, consistent, and accompanied by marks of equipment dragged through the snow. Approximately 1 kilometer further, the search party noticed a second set of faint tracks following the patrol from the tree line. These were believed to belong to partisan scouts. Just before the ravine mentioned in the last radio transmission, the tracks became chaotic. Boot prints overlapped at irregular angles, as if the men had begun turning rapidly. Then only a few meters beyond this point, the tracks ended completely. Not faded, not buried, ended. The snow was untouched beyond a sharply defined area as if no one had stepped further. German soldiers present at the scene wrote in their reports that the snow had no sign of depression, no crushed branches, no struggle, no blood. All 8 members of the patrol had vanished as though erased. Even more unsettling was the discovery that the second set of tracks, the suspected partisan prints, ended the same way. 8 German soldiers and their unknown trackers had simply ceased to leave footprints. Search teams spread out, sweeping the forest for nearly 3 days but located nothing. No weapons, no torn fabric, no cartridge casings, no ration tins, not even disturbed snow where bodies might have fallen. Heavy snowfall came on the 4th day, burying the area and making continued searches impossible. In the aftermath, the divisional command reviewed all partisan activity reports. No partisan unit claimed responsibility. Soviet archives, declassified decades later, also showed no record of an engagement, capture, or execution related to this patrol. This ruled out the most common explanation. For German officers in the sector, it raised an alarming question. How could an entire squad vanish without a single trace of where they went? A psychological report from the Army Medical Corps, written weeks later, suggested that extreme cold could induce disorientation, leading soldiers to wander off. But this did not explain the vanished tracks, nor the synchronized disappearance of all 8 men at the same point. This case became one of the most cited examples in internal German discussions about the vanished patrol phenomenon. By the end of winter, similar incidents would multiply. As January progressed into early February 1943, a specific section of forest north of the Polotsk-Vitebsk corridor began developing a reputation among German units. Soldiers started referring to it informally as Der Wald ohne Rückkehr, the Forest of No Return. Although unofficial, the name spread quickly through infantry companies, supply columns, and engineering units forced to move through the region. The origin of the name can be traced to a cluster of disappearances concentrated within a narrow band of frozen marshland, surrounded by dense pine forest. The area was strategically important because it served as a natural barrier between Soviet partisan zones and German supply routes, meaning German patrols passed through it nearly every day. Yet within the span of 3 weeks, 4 separate patrols, each led by different officers and operating at different times, vanished inside the same corridor. The first disappearance involved a 9-man reconnaissance team from the 212th Infantry Division. They entered the forest shortly after sunrise, moving along a marked path used regularly by German radio men. A snowfall began around midday, reducing visibility, but the patrol made a scheduled radio update confirming clear movement. They never made their next check-in. When a search unit retraced their path, it followed their footprints until it reached a frozen marsh. At the marsh's edge, the tracks simply stopped. The patrol had not walked onto the ice, nor around it. There were no lateral prints. It looked as if the men had walked directly into the air and vanished. A second disappearance occurred a week later when a 7-man patrol sent from the 131st Infantry Regiment attempted to inspect the same forest route. This group carried flares, extra batteries, and a stronger radio. They advanced cautiously, stopping frequently to scan the tree lines. Shortly before dusk, they transmitted that they were hearing distant movement but could not determine the source. Minutes later, they attempted to send a second transmission, but the message cut off abruptly. When a recovery squad reached the forest road early the next morning, they found the patrol's footprints, their spacing calm and consistent. Yet once again, less than 100 meters inside the tree line, the prints diverged in multiple directions as though the men had begun reacting to something unseen. The tracks then looped irregularly, suggesting confusion. A few meters later, they ended abruptly on untouched snow. No signs of a firefight were present, no cartridge casings, no blood, no torn equipment, only scattered pine needles disturbed by sudden movement. It was the third disappearance that convinced officers something was abnormal. This time, the patrol numbered 14 men, larger, heavily armed, and commanded by an officer who had previously served in Finland and was familiar with northern forest warfare. They advanced along the exact same route, marking trees with chalk to ensure visibility. They too vanished. When a search team arrived, they found only 2 things: a chalk mark smeared on a tree trunk and a single German flashlight lying on the ground with the lens cracked inward as though hit by something falling from above. The fourth disappearance sealed the forest's reputation. This patrol was the largest, 20 men from a security battalion accustomed to fighting partisans. They carried automatic rifles, grenades, and 2 light machine guns. Before entering the forest, they fired test rounds to confirm their weapons functioned in the cold. They marched in tight formation and stayed close to the marked line. The search party that went after them, alerted when they missed evening roll call, found something different this time. For the first time in any of the incidents, there were signs of a struggle, but only in a very limited sense. Several sets of tracks indicated sudden running. A handful of shell casings were found, suggesting at least some shots had been fired. But there were no bodies, no blood, no broken branches, no signs of fallen soldiers or drag marks. Even stranger, the pattern of the footprints suggested the men had run in different directions, away from the path, almost as if scattering from a sudden threat. Yet none of the tracks led anywhere beyond a certain short distance. As with all the previous cases, they stopped abruptly on snow that showed no further disturbance. It appeared as if the men had been swallowed by the forest itself. When Divisional Command examined the evidence, they noted several disturbing consistencies. All disappearances occurred within the same forest corridor. None of the patrols reported direct contact, with the enemy radios failed at specific moments. Tracks always ended in undisturbed snow size or strength of the patrol, did not reduce the outcome. By early February. Several company officers began refusing to send small patrols into the area unless explicitly ordered. Even combat engineers tasked with laying communication lines requested escorts larger than usual. The German High Command recorded these incidents as unresolved reconnaissance losses. But internally, officers acknowledged a growing fear spreading among soldiers. For the first time since the early winter retreats, the threat did not feel like conventional Soviet forces. What frightened them was the pattern, the silence, and the absence of any physical evidence. The forest had taken 4 patrols, and no one understood how. The turning point in the vanished patrol cases came in mid-February 1943, when a small 3-man forward signal team recorded what became the only partially documented eyewitness account connected to the disappearances. It was not a full patrol, just a radio man, his assistant, and an escort rifleman from the 206th Infantry Division. Their job was simple: check a set of cable relays running along the western edge of the forest of no return. They were not supposed to enter the tree line at all. The team left their outpost shortly after midday. According to the logbook, the weather was clear but worsening, with fog forming near ground level. The radio man carried a short-range field unit. Operating on a limited battery life meant only for check-ins during maintenance tasks. They reached the cable junction point without issue, performed the scheduled relay test, and were expected back before dusk. But at roughly 1 hour before sunset, the battalion received an unexpected transmission, broken, faint, and partially distorted by static. The radio man reported that the team was observing movement near the tree line and saw what he described as figures standing between the pines. He could not determine whether they were partisan scouts, Soviet infantry, or something else. The fog was thick, and he stated that visibility had dropped to less than 15 meters. His last clear sentence was, "Something is approaching from the trees." The signal cut off instantly. Attempts to re-establish contact failed. The battery should not have died, and static interference in that sector had never reached a level capable of blocking transmission completely. Concerned by the abrupt loss, the company commander dispatched a 15-man reaction group to the relay junction. What they found was the most detailed physical evidence ever recovered in these cases, and yet it raised more questions than answers. The search team located the cable relay point without difficulty. The 3 sets of outbound footprints were present and led to the relay box exactly where they should have. But on the return path, something unusual appeared. Instead of a single trail of 3 sets of prints leading back toward the outpost, the tracks diverged only 20 to 30 meters from the relay site. It looked as if the 3 men had suddenly turned in different directions at the same time. The radio man's tracks led toward the tree line. The escort rifleman's tracks angled sharply left. The assistant's prints veered right. None of these paths continued for long. The radio man's footprints ended only a few steps into the trees on untouched snow. The rifleman's path stopped after roughly 20 paces. The assistant stopped after 15. No bodies. No signs of a fight. No equipment dropped on the ground. Not even the radio, which should have been found somewhere if it had been discarded or lost during a struggle. More disturbing was what the search team noticed around the relay point itself. Several pine branches, thick, high branches, had been snapped, but not by bullets. They were bent downward as if something heavy had been dropped onto them from above. Snow patterns below these branches suggested downward displacement, not lateral movement. It was as though something had fallen vertically, compressed the snow, and then vanished. But there were no rope marks, no parachute remnants, and no evidence of aircraft in the area. The battalion report noted another anomaly. The fog seemed unnaturally concentrated inside the forest. Soldiers described it as denser than ordinary weather, settling low and swirling slowly even when the wind picked up. The fog dissipated only after the search ended at nightfall. The three missing men were never found. Later examination by officers raised several troubling points. The radio signal failed at the exact moment the team reported figures. All three soldiers appeared to break formation simultaneously. Their tracks ended abruptly in undisturbed snow. No evidence of partisan ambush or Soviet unit movement existed in the area. The broken pine branches were too high to be reached by a man standing on the ground. This incident forced the divisional command to acknowledge a pattern that no one wanted to put into writing. Whatever was happening in the forest was not behaving like any known partisan tactic, Soviet maneuver, or natural phenomenon recorded by German field units elsewhere on the Eastern Front. After this event, soldiers refused to approach the tree line without large escort groups. Some squads openly stated that they would disobey orders if told to enter the deeper forest without overwhelming numbers. This was the first time fear spread beyond the infantry units and reached the officers. Following the disappearance of the three-man signal team, German command decided that the situation in the forest of no return could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents. For the first time, an entire search battalion, 120 men, was ordered to sweep the forest corridor, locate partisan strongholds, and recover any trace of the missing patrols. What followed became one of the most unusual recorded refusals in the German army on the Eastern Front. The battalion assigned to the operation, drawn from the 5th Security Regiment, was experienced in anti-partisan warfare. These units were hardened, used to ambushes, mines, and difficult terrain. Many had fought in Belarusian forests for more than a year. Their commanding officer, Hauptmann Rudi Bremer, was known for his strict discipline and aggressive tactics. Yet even Bremer's authority would be tested by what awaited them. The operation began shortly after dawn. The battalion advanced toward the forest corridor in 3 staggered lines, maintaining radio contact and spreading out to avoid encirclement. The first 100 meters were uneventful, though many soldiers later admitted to feeling a pressure or heaviness in the air, as if the temperature dropped sharply whenever they neared the tree line. The first sign that something was wrong occurred before the battalion even crossed into the forest. Several men at the front reported hearing faint metallic tapping from deeper inside the woods, slow, rhythmic, inconsistent, like metal striking wood or stone. The officers assumed it was partisan activity, possibly signaling. The battalion pressed forward, but only 50 meters inside the forest, the soldiers began to display signs of acute discomfort. The fog hanging low between the trees was thick enough to obscure visibility beyond 15 meters. Radios, tested only minutes before, began to degrade. Signal quality fluctuated despite clear weather overhead. Then came the moment that broke the unit's discipline. 2 men from the forward platoon, veterans with no history of nervous instability, suddenly halted and refused to advance further. One claimed he could hear footsteps behind the trees to his right, even though no tracks were visible. The other insisted he saw movement in the upper branches, though nothing could be confirmed by anyone else. They were ordered forward, but both remained rooted in place, trembling. Within minutes, 5 more soldiers began reporting similar sensations. The feeling of being watched, movement in the fog, faint silhouettes at the edge of visibility, the sense that something was circling the formation, none of these observations were corroborated by officers or scouts. Yet the psychological impact spread quickly. The decisive moment came when one of the machine gun operators, a man described as stable under fire and fearless in previous engagements, suddenly dropped his weapon and backed away from the tree line. He shouted that he saw people standing between the trees, unmoving, watching the battalion. His panic infected the men near him, and a ripple of fear passed through the front ranks. Hauptmann Bremer attempted to restore order, but even he could not ignore the growing radio interference and the silence of the forest. For a region known for aggressive partisan activity, the complete absence of noise, no birds, no branches snapping, no distant movement, was unnerving. He ordered the battalion to advance 20 meters deeper to confirm whether enemy forces were present. They managed only 10. At that point, several soldiers turned around and began walking back the way they came, ignoring commands. Others hesitated but made no move forward. The battalion's cohesion was breaking down in real time, not due to combat, but due to something they could not see or identify. Bremer issued a final order to advance. No one followed it. Historical records show that instead of pressing the order, Bremer reluctantly gave the command to withdraw. The battalion retreated to open ground and established a perimeter, shaken and disorganized, even though not a single shot had been fired at them. A formal report was filed hours later, describing the forest as psychologically destabilizing and citing unknown factors affecting soldier morale and perception. This was unprecedented language for a German field officer, especially in a security regiment known for harsh enforcement of discipline. The High Command's response was equally telling. Instead of reprimanding the battalion, they designated the forest corridor as a restricted zone, limiting all future patrols and forbidding entry except under strict necessity. Something in that forest had broken a unit that had previously faced explosives, ambushes, and close-quarter combat without hesitation. And still, no one had seen a single partisan. 2 days after the search battalion's refusal to enter the forest corridor, German command received an unexpected report from a logistics unit operating several kilometers east of the restricted zone. The unit had come across a small, unmanned defensive outpost that was not listed on any recent maps. It appeared to have belonged to a German platoon stationed there earlier in the winter, but no one in the area had records indicating that the outpost was still active. This discovery immediately drew attention from divisional headquarters. If the outpost had been abandoned recently, it might contain clues about the vanished patrols. A 20-man inspection team was sent to investigate. The outpost was a simple wooden structure, partially buried in snow, with a small observation tower and 2 dugout shelters connected by a narrow trench. On approach, the inspection team noted something unusual. No tracks in or out of the site, despite the snow being only a few days old. This meant the outpost had been empty at least since the last snowfall, yet no abandonment order had been recorded. The closer the team got, the stranger the scene became. The front gate had been left open. A lantern still hung from the beam above it, swinging slightly in the cold wind as if someone had touched it recently. But the snow beneath it was undisturbed and smooth. Inside the main shelter, soldiers found equipment left exactly as if the occupants had stepped outside only moments earlier, coats hanging, rifles stacked, canned rations half opened, and a map left on the central table. Yet snow had already drifted inside through the doorway, meaning no one had been in the shelter for days. The beds were still made. Boots sat by the bunks in pairs. A kettle on the stove held frozen water. The stove itself had gone cold long ago, and yet nothing indicated a hurried evacuation. No overturned chairs, no missing supplies, no signs of conflict. Only the radio set in the corner offered a hint of something odd. The receiver was still connected to power, generator fuel half full, but the signal frequency knob had been turned all the way to an empty, static-filled channel. According to field communication guidelines, this was something German radio men never did. If they abandoned a post, even temporarily, the receiver would remain on the last known operational channel for recall. This deliberate shift to a dead frequency puzzled the team. While searching the second shelter, primarily used for ammunition storage, the inspection team found an even more disturbing clue. On the far wall, drawn faintly with charcoal, were several straight vertical lines, as if someone had been marking days. There were 23 lines in total, but the last 4 were irregular, slanted, and pressed more deeply into the wood, as though they had been carved in haste or distress. Beside these markings, another charcoal pattern stood out, a crude drawing of trees, closely clustered together with a ring of dark shading at the base. It resembled the shape of the forest corridor. Under it, in shaky handwriting, someone had written a single word, Umzingel, surrounded. If the men at the outpost believed they were surrounded, they left no report, no message, and no emergency signal. Outside the shelter, the inspection team circled the perimeter looking for any signs of tracks, drag marks, or footprints. There was nothing, not even traces of foxes, wolves, or retreating soldiers. Only on the far side of the trench did they find something unusual. Several pine branches on the ground, snapped cleanly. Some were nearly 2 meters long. They appeared to have been broken off at height, but the branches showed no impact marks from shells or bullets. As with the signal team disappearance, the pattern suggested something, or someone, had moved through the upper canopy. On returning to headquarters, the inspection team filed a report describing the outpost as abruptly abandoned under unknown circumstances. This was the first official acknowledgement that the vanishings were affecting not only moving patrols, but also stationary fortified positions. The divisional staff attempted to determine who had last been assigned to the outpost. They eventually discovered that the unit stationed there, 10 men, had been scheduled to rotate out 2 weeks earlier. They were never reported missing, never noted as desertions, and never listed as casualties. It was as if their existence simply slipped between the cracks of the retreating front line, yet their rifles remained, their gear remained, their food remained. They did not. This revelation marked a turning point in the vanished patrol phenomenon. The disappearances were no longer limited to small moving groups lost in the woods. Entire posted units could vanish without a trace. After the discovery of the abandoned outpost, German Divisional Command escalated the situation. They needed a method to track the missing men without risking further human casualties. The solution seemed obvious. Deploy rescue dogs, trained scent trackers used frequently on the Eastern Front to locate wounded or lost soldiers. These dogs had successfully located men buried under snow, trapped in collapsed dugouts, and even ambushed by partisans. Their ability to pick up traces invisible to the human eye made them invaluable in winter conditions. But this time, something happened that had never been recorded before. A specialized K-9 unit from the 304th Security Battalion arrived with 8 German Shepherds. These were not inexperienced animals. They were highly trained, accustomed to gunfire, explosives, blood, and the unpredictability of frontline operations. The dogs were brought to the edge of the forest of no return, where the tracks of the vanished signal team had last been found. The handlers expected the dogs to pick up a scent trail immediately. Instead, all 8 animals reacted in a way the handlers could not explain. The moment they approached the tree line, the dogs whimpered, lowered their bodies, and refused to cross the first line of trees. 2 dogs dug their claws into the snow, trying to back away. Another began barking toward the interior of the forest, short, frantic barks, not directed at any visible target. Handlers assumed the dogs were reacting to wolves, a common threat in the region, so they attempted to encourage them forward again. This time the animals' reaction was even more extreme. Several spun around, pulling hard on their leashes. One broke free and sprinted more than 50 meters back toward the open field before being caught. Another lay flat on the ground, refusing to move in any direction. When a handler tried to physically pull one of the larger shepherds toward the trees, the dog bit the handler's sleeve, something unheard of among trained military dogs. It was as if the entire K-9 unit sensed something inside the forest that the humans could not. The commanding officer, Oberstleutnant Weber, insisted the operation continue. He ordered the handlers to release 2 of the dogs off-leash, hoping their instinctual behavior might overcome the hesitation. The moment the handlers unclipped the collars, both dogs bolted, not into the forest, but in the opposite direction, fleeing across the snow until they disappeared behind a ridge. The handlers were stunned. They had never seen a coordinated panic like this. Still determined to continue, the officer ordered the remaining handlers to attempt a perimeter sweep, keeping the dogs near the tree line but not entering it. This approach also failed. The animals would not go near the forest. They circled anxiously, pacing, growling at nothing, refusing to follow commands. It was then that the handlers reported something that only deepened the mystery. All dogs, without exception, were focused on the same point, a narrow, dark gap between two closely packed pine trees, about 20 meters inside the forest. They stared in that direction, ears pinned back, bodies tense. But to the human eye, nothing was there. No movement, no shapes, no tracks, no sound. After several minutes of this tense stalemate, the dogs suddenly turned away from the forest altogether. They sat down, facing the open field, refusing to look back. One handler said later in his statement, "It was like they recognized something they had seen before and wanted no part of it." Unable to force the animals into the forest, the officer aborted the operation. The failure was recorded in the battalion diary with the brief clinical note, K-9 tracking impossible. Animals displayed extreme agitation and noncompliance. What was not included in the formal report were the conversations afterward, where dog handlers, hardened men, not prone to superstition, admitted quietly that they believed the animals had sensed something dangerous, something not human. The divisional staff, already strained by previous events, was forced to confront a disturbing reality. The disappearances were not merely a result of weather, partisans, or confusion. Now even trained tracking dogs refused to enter the forest, reacting with a fear that could not be fabricated or imagined. With both human and animal units unable to penetrate the corridor safely, command had to reevaluate their entire approach to the region. With human patrols unwilling to enter the corridor and rescue dogs refusing to cross the tree line, German command shifted to a new strategy: night surveillance. If the forest was too dangerous to enter, perhaps observing it from a distance, especially under darkness, might reveal what was happening inside. A small observation post was established on a low ridge overlooking the forest of no return. It was manned by 7 soldiers from a reconnaissance company equipped with binoculars, a flare pistol, a machine gun, and 2 signal lamps. Their job was simple: watch the forest after sunset and report anything unusual. What they recorded over the next 48 hours became one of the most puzzling incidents documented in the battalion archives. On the first night, visibility was poor due to fog. The men reported no unusual movement. But shortly past midnight on the second night, the observation post spotted something completely unexpected. It began as a faint flicker deep within the trees, far beyond where any German unit was stationed. At first they believed it was a partisan campfire, but within seconds they realized the light wasn't stable. It moved, slowly, silently, and at an impossible height. The soldiers described it as a small glowing point, pale yellow or white, drifting horizontally between the tree trunks. It was too high to be a lantern, too steady to be a reflection, and too controlled to be a natural phenomenon. The shape never flickered like fire and never swayed like a torch carried by a person. It moved with unnatural smoothness, sliding between the trees like it was gliding. The men watched it for more than 2 minutes. Then a second light appeared. This one was dimmer, almost bluish, following the same path as the first. After a few seconds, a third appeared, redder but equally smooth and silent. The lights were separated by equal distances, as though coordinated. The soldiers noted that no shadows were cast by the lights, and none reflected off the snow in a natural way. One soldier quietly asked if they should fire a signal flare. The corporal in command refused. He later said, "Whatever was in there, it wasn't something we wanted to announce ourselves to." The lights continued drifting silently deeper into the forest, eventually disappearing behind the densest cluster of pines. The observation post was unsettled, but they remained at their station. Roughly 1 hour later, they noticed something else. The forest grew darker. Not from sunset, it was already night. Not from clouds, the sky above the ridge was clear. It was as if a shadow passed between the trees, large enough to dim the entire corridor for several seconds at a time. No sound accompanied the movement. No footsteps. No branches cracking. Nothing. The soldiers described feeling a strange pressure in their ears, similar to the sensation before a storm, yet the air was still. One man claimed the darkness moved like a solid shape, although none of the others could confirm that. Shortly after this, the third unusual event occurred. In the far distance, deeper inside the forest, three distinct thuds echoed, slow, heavy, and spaced evenly. Not gunshots, not falling trees, not artillery. The sound was dull, blunt, as if something massive had struck the earth with great force. The ground beneath the observation post vibrated slightly. The corporal immediately radioed headquarters, reporting lights, shadows, and unidentified impacts inside restricted zone. His tone was steady, but those who later read the transmission noted the rare wording for a German field report. About 20 minutes later, everything fell silent again. The forest returned to its usual unsettling stillness. No lights, no shadows, no sounds. By dawn, nothing could be seen inside the forest, even with binoculars. A follow-up team approached the edge of the trees that morning, but, as with previous incidents, they observed no tracks, no broken branches, no evidence of vehicles or campfires. Not even disturbance in the snow where the lights had been. Their formal report concluded, no source for illumination or impacts could be found. Unofficially, the soldiers said something else. The forest was awake that night. This incident became the first documented case of unexplained nighttime activity connected to the vanished patrols. Though German command attempted to rationalize the event as optical illusions caused by fog, the men who witnessed it never accepted that explanation. Because soldiers on the Eastern Front were familiar with fog, cold, and forest distortion. They knew what fire looked like. They knew what lanterns looked like. They knew what camp movements looked like. What they saw that night was none of those things. After the reports of drifting lights, moving shadows, and unexplained impacts deep inside the forest, Divisional Command attempted a different approach. Set an ambush near the forest edge and force the enemy, whatever the enemy was, to reveal itself. The plan was simple on paper. Deploy a team of 20 men, conceal them in shallow snow-dug firing positions, maintain radio silence, observe the forest through the night, engage any movement detected approaching the tree line. It was a standard counter-partisan tactic, used dozens of times across Belarus. But this time, nothing went according to plan. The ambush unit was drawn from the 7th Company, 206th Infantry Division, led by Lieutenant Joseph Ritter, a disciplined officer with experience in forest engagements. His men were hardened veterans, many of whom had fought since the early months of Barbarossa. They were not easily intimidated. The ambush site was positioned just 70 meters from the dark gap between the trees that had frightened the rescue dogs days earlier. Snow was cleared, white camouflage sheets were laid down, and rifles were oiled for cold weather firing. Everything was executed by the book. At 2200 hours, the unit went silent. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. The forest was completely still, but around midnight, Lieutenant Ritter reported the first anomaly: radio interference. Their short-range unit, kept powered on only to receive emergency transmissions, started producing faint static. Ritter tested the transmitter quietly. Clear. The static wasn't from their radio. It was coming from somewhere else, bleeding into the signal. After 5 minutes, the interference abruptly stopped. Exactly 10 minutes later, the second anomaly appeared. From the far tree line deep inside the forest, a faint clattering sound echoed, metal against wood, similar to what the search battalion had heard previously. One of the soldiers whispered. "Axes?" Ritter shook his head. No echo pattern, too irregular. The clattering continued for nearly a minute, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The snow around them remained undisturbed. The tree line stayed dark. Then came the third anomaly. A low humming. Soft, deep, almost mechanical. It rose and fell like distant machinery, but there were no Soviet vehicles within kilometers of the restricted zone. The nearest partisan group capable of operating machinery was far to the south, and reports from Soviet archives decades later confirmed the Red Army had no engines or generators in that corridor at the time. The humming grew louder, yet the ground did not vibrate. The air did. It felt thick, heavy, as if the temperature had dropped 5 degrees in seconds. A soldier later described it as, like the forest was breathing. Ritter ordered all men to fix their sights on the tree line. What happened next was recorded in 2 separate testimonies and partially captured in Ritter's written after-action report. Exactly at 0:47 hours, the dark gap between the trees, the same one the dogs stared at, began to change. It brightened, not with fire, not with lantern light, not with reflections. It brightened with a pale, cold, bluish glow spreading slowly across the snow, illuminating the first 5 meters of forest floor. The glow did not flicker. It pulsed, faintly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. The men held their breath. The humming grew louder. The light grew brighter. Then the radio on Ritter's belt crackled without anyone touching it. A single burst of static, sharp, sudden, almost like a signal. At that exact moment, Ritter gave the order to fire. 20 rifles cracked in unison. 2 MG-34 machine guns unleashed full bursts into the glowing section of forest. Muzzle flashes lit the snow. Shell casings rained down. The snowbank in front of them shook with the percussion of synchronized fire. The men emptied entire magazines. Then silence. When the smoke cleared and the echo faded, the forest was dark again. The glow had vanished instantly, as though extinguished. The humming stopped. The temperature normalized. Ritter immediately ordered ceasefire and sent 2 men forward to check for bodies or blood trails. They advanced 30 meters and stopped. There was nothing. No corpses. No wounded. No disturbed branches. No tracks leading in or out. No footprints, German, Soviet, or otherwise. Not even the deep bullet impacts normally visible in fresh winter bark. All rounds fired into the tree line had simply disappeared. Confused, Ritter examined the ground. No bullet marks, no splintered wood, no ricochet patterns on the trees. It was as if they had fired into empty space. One soldier, Obergefreiter Kraus, swore under oath that he saw bullets pass through the glowing area without hitting anything solid, as though the glow was not illuminating an object but was itself the object. Another insisted he saw a silhouette inside the light just before firing, but no one else corroborated it. Ritter wrote in his final line of the report, "Ambush unsuccessful, target unknown, no evidence of engagement." Divisional command stamped the report as classified, noting that the ambush had yielded no actionable results. Unofficially, however, the soldiers who participated that night said something very different. "We tried to shoot the forest, and the forest shot back with silence." Until this point, every disappearance in the Forest of No Return shared one defining characteristic: no survivors, no bodies, no equipment, no trace. But in late February 1943, this pattern broke, when a single German soldier emerged from the forest alive, days after his patrol had vanished. His survival should have solved the mystery. Instead, it deepened it. The soldier was Gefreiter Lothar Wise, a 30-year-old rifleman assigned to a 6-man reconnaissance team that disappeared near the eastern edge of the corridor. His patrol had been sent to verify suspected partisan movements, but never returned. 3 days later, during a morning perimeter check near the restricted zone, Wise stumbled out of the trees, alone, disoriented, and frostbitten. But the way he appeared was what unsettled the men who found him. He did not emerge walking normally. He collapsed out of the forest, as if pushed forward by something behind him. He crawled the last few meters, hands shaking, his face gray with cold. His uniform was intact, no bullet holes, no torn fabric, no burns, but his boots were missing. His socks were frozen to his feet. His hair was covered in frost, and his eyes were wide open with a blank, glassy focus. When medics lifted him, he reacted violently, thrashing and screaming incoherently. It took 3 men to restrain him. Even then he did not appear to recognize where he was. He muttered the same phrase repeatedly. They moved without sound, they moved without sound. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. He was rushed to a field infirmary where doctors attempted to stabilize him. His body temperature was dangerously low, borderline hypothermic, yet his injuries made no sense. He had no bruises, no cuts, no signs of combat. Frostbite marked his fingers and toes, but his torso was warm enough to suggest he had not been exposed to the open environment the entire time. Something, or someone, had kept him partially sheltered. After 5 hours, he regained enough coherence to speak in full sentences. The battalion commander personally questioned him. What he said entered divisional rumor within days. Wise claimed the patrol reached a narrow clearing inside the forest shortly before dusk. They felt watched. Every man in the group sensed it, though no one saw an enemy. Their radio man attempted a transmission, but the radio produced only hums and bursts of static. Then the fog thickened, not descending from above like normal fog, rising from the ground like smoke from wet earth. It curled around their legs, climbing higher, obscuring the trees. Wise claimed they heard something moving between the pines, not footsteps, sliding, soft, slow, deliberate. His sergeant ordered the men to retreat and regroup at the last marked tree. They attempted to move back, but the fog closed behind them. Wise's voice trembled when describing what happened next. He said shapes appeared between the trees, dark, tall, and motionless at first. The fog swirled around them as if drawn to their presence. He could not describe their faces or clothing, only that they were wrongly shaped, silhouettes that did not match the height or posture of known Soviet soldiers. The men panicked. One ran deeper into the fog. Another fired his weapon blindly. Wise remembered hearing a gunshot, then a scream, then silence, then another scream cut short. When he tried to run, he felt something grip the air near his face. Not a hand, not a branch. Like the air thickened, he said, like walking into water. He claimed he lost consciousness shortly after. When he awoke, he was alone, no tracks, no equipment. The fog was gone, the forest was silent. He wandered without direction for what he believed was an hour before collapsing near the tree line, where the German patrol found him. Officers dismissed the story as delirium from frostbite and shock. But 2 details could not be explained. First, Wise's watch had stopped exactly 30 minutes after his patrol's scheduled radio check-in, suggesting something happened to them soon after their last transmission. Second, Wise's footprints, leading from the forest to the rescue point, were the only tracks present. There were no tracks behind him. The forest had released him, but it had released him alone. Wise was transferred to a rear medical facility the next morning. But before military doctors could question him again, he suffered a severe mental breakdown. He became unresponsive, staring blankly, muttering incoherently, and refusing food. 8 days later, he died in his sleep without regaining clarity. His death certificate listed multi-organ failure from exposure. But his final medical note read, "Patient woke screaming shortly before death. Repeated word, shadows." After Jeffrader Wise's death, command tried to suppress his account, labeling it the ramblings of a frostbitten, delirious soldier. But privately, his interview terrified officers because it aligned with dozens of unexplained patrol vanishings. Still, without physical evidence, headquarters had nothing to report to higher command. That changed when a camera, believed lost with another missing patrol, was unexpectedly recovered. It happened by accident. A repair crew, restoring a damaged field telephone line, stumbled upon a small leather pouch, half buried in snow near the western boundary of the forest of no return. The pouch contained a folded map, a broken compass, and a compact German Leica III camera. The pouch belonged to a 12-man reconnaissance team from the 337th Infantry Regiment, the same unit whose disappearance had set off the first major investigation weeks earlier. Their bodies were never found. Their equipment was never recovered, until now. The camera was intact, though one of the knobs was cracked. The film inside had not been rewound, meaning the last frame was still exposed. This discovery prompted enormous interest. The camera was rushed to divisional headquarters, where a photography specialist attempted to develop the film. 5 frames were ruined by exposure. 3 were blurry, but 2 frames came out clear enough to analyze. These 2 photographs would become the only known visual evidence related to the disappearances. The first photograph, the broken clearing, the first usable image, showed a section of forest illuminated by late afternoon light. The photo was taken from a slight angle, suggesting the soldier who took it raised the camera quickly, not framing carefully. In the foreground stood several pines covered in frost, but the detail that grabbed attention was deeper in the frame. A nearly perfect circular clearing, roughly 10 meters wide, where no snow had settled. The ground within the circle was dark, either wet or disturbed. Around the perimeter of the circle, the trees appeared bent outward, as if something forceful had pressed them from the center. What frightened analysts was not the shape but the uniformity of it. It did not look natural. It looked engineered. The German forestry officer who examined the image wrote, "Force applied from interior outward, not consistent with wind, snow load, or blast pressure." No explosion had been reported in the area. This was something else. The second photograph, the tall shadow, the second photograph was far more disturbing. It showed a fog-shrouded section of forest, taken hurriedly. The camera had been angled as though the photographer was moving. The image was grainy, motion blurred, but one shape was unmistakable. A tall, humanoid silhouette positioned between 2 trees in the distance. The shape was elongated, too tall for any Soviet soldier, easily 2 meters or more. Its limbs were disproportionately long. The head appeared narrow. There were no visible facial features. To some, it looked like a man. To others, not at all. The silhouette did not resemble the size, uniform, or posture of partisan fighters or Red Army infantry. It stood perfectly still. Beside the figure, faint streaks of light appeared, white, almost transparent, curling upward like mist pulled by an unseen force. A military analyst wrote in his private notes, "This is not fog. Fog does not rise in strands." Another officer, seeing the image secretly, muttered, "There is something in that forest that is not supposed to be there." The official report, however, sanitized the findings. Photographs inconclusive, possibly misidentified Soviet personnel. But every man who saw the original negatives knew that explanation was a lie. The last frame, never fully developed, contained only a smear of light and what looked like the edge of a hand or glove covering the lens, as if the photographer panicked in the final moment. The camera itself showed no signs of damage except for the cracked knob. There was no blood on the pouch, no tearing, no indication of force. The pouch had simply been dropped and buried under days of snowfall. The German command quietly concluded 2 things. First, the missing patrol had encountered something unusual enough to warrant taking photographs. Second, whatever they saw, it was close enough and threatening enough that the last frame was taken in apparent desperation. The camera was locked away in a metal safe in battalion headquarters. It was never mentioned again in official documentation. By mid-March 1943, German command had reached a breaking point. 11 full chapters of incident reports, disappearances, abandoned positions, failed searches, confused survivors, strange lights, and a camera showing a circular clearing and an elongated figure had left the division with one conclusion. Whatever was happening inside the forest corridor was beyond their ability to control, explain, or contain. The area remained silent for several days after the last known incident. No new disappearances were reported, and no unusual sounds or lights were observed. This temporary calm only made the officers more uneasy. A final reconnaissance attempt was considered, using a 40-man group supported by heavy machine guns. But before the operation could begin, new information arrived from the northern sector. A Soviet partisan prisoner, captured during a separate engagement, was interrogated by the Germans. When shown a map of the region, he immediately refused to speak about the forest corridor. He insisted that his group never entered it and claimed that even the NKVD avoided that stretch of woodland. He said local villagers called it the place where voices do not return. When pressed for clarification, he became visibly distressed and said that several partisan scouts had gone missing there during the previous winter. He claimed that the forest did not behave the same way as others in the region, that sound traveled strangely, and that sometimes shadows appear where shadows should not be. After this statement, he refused to discuss the subject again. The testimony was brief, fragmented, and likely influenced by fear. But it was enough for the divisional staff to make a decision. No further attempts would be made to investigate the forest interior. The corridor was officially listed as unstable ground with dangerous environmental conditions. Off the record, officers acknowledged that no environmental explanation matched the facts. Still, for the sake of morale, the environmental classification was made permanent. On March 22, 1943, the final written order was issued. The forest corridor was to be sealed off entirely. No German unit, regardless of size, was permitted to enter. Patrol routes were redrawn to go around the zone. Telephone lines were rerouted. Observation posts were relocated. The area was marked on all maps with a simple warning: unpassable terrain. Soldiers who served in the sector said privately that the command was not avoiding terrain. They were avoiding something inside it. Spring arrived slowly, melting the snow. When thawing should have revealed bodies, weapons, or equipment from the missing patrols, nothing appeared. The ground produced no remains. The marshes revealed no trapped men. The trees yielded no new clues. The disappearances remained complete. When the front shifted later that year, the region changed hands repeatedly. After the war ended, Soviet forestry units surveyed the area. Their findings were never publicly published, but a single internal note surfaced decades later, stating that the corridor exhibited abnormal soil behavior and recommending it be left undeveloped and uninhabited. Local villagers, when interviewed in later years, said they avoided that part of the forest entirely. Hunters did not go there. Travelers walked around it even in daylight. Some claimed animals refused to cross into the interior. Others said that in winter, strange lights could be seen between the trees. None of these accounts were verified, but the forest remained unusually empty. As for the German records, they list the vanished patrol incidents under a single classification: unresolved losses, March 1943. No further investigation was ever conducted. No bodies were recovered. No additional survivors emerged. The story ends where the forest begins. What happened inside remains unknown. The German officers closed the file because they could not solve it. The Soviet authorities ignored it because it served no political purpose. And the forest, silent and unchanged, kept whatever answers it held. Even today, historians reviewing the reports say the same thing. It was not weather. It was not partisans. It was not panic. It was something else entirely, something that left no footprints, no sound, and no survivors who could speak clearly about what they saw. The final conclusion, recorded unofficially by one German major, remains the simplest summary of the entire event. Whatever took those men was real. We just did not understand it.